I'm Darren Morton,
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift.
the lifestyle medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Hello, brother Simon. How are you doing in sunny Spain?
Well, thank you for the warm greeting, and I return that to you. It's not sunny at the moment.
Really? Wow.
No, yeah, it's the wet season at the moment. We're coming up on we've entered midwinter, and there's been a lot of Arctic weather fronts coming across Europe. So yeah, it's there's extended periods of rain and very cold. Cold for here. It's 2 degrees. Feels cold.
2 degrees.
2 degrees. Yeah. 2 degrees.
Well, we're still enjoying the sunshine here in Australia. Just gone past midsummer, and I actually get to this point of the year, and I start to grieve slightly because I know that.
Yeah, I'm starting to get excited.
Well, that's it. On balance, we're doing okay. But I've got a question.
Yeah.
I got a question for you, and the question is: do you like food?
It's not a question. That's a joke. Of course, I like food.
You like food?
I like everything about food. I like looking at food. I love buying food. I love going to the. Sometime I'll tell you about the market system here, which is different from Australia. But I love buying food. I love preparing food. I love cooking food. I love looking at food. I love eating food. I love the feeling of food in my mouth. Yeah. I like
You're
food.
a foodie. You're a foodie.
Yeah.
You're a true
Yeah.
foodie. You know, truth be told, I wouldn't describe myself as a foodie at all. I think it's probably one of the, not least favourite, that's probably the wrong terminology, but my least passion area of lifestyle medicine. So obviously exercise is number one for me. And food, I'm addicted to it. I should add that. I have to consume it daily, as we all do. But yeah, I enjoy simple food. I like food, but it's not like it sort of occupies a whole lot of my headspace. Or like I know people who get excited about thinking what they're gonna have for dinner or lunch, and I'm like, let's go eat something. And I like healthy food,
Except for chocolate. You're a chocolate.
and I do like a little bit of chocolate from time to time. Yeah, I confess to that.
A little bit of chocolate. That's not the way I've heard the story told.
It's all relative. So here's an interesting thing, though, that we know, and look, there's been quite a lot of interest around this, but the new dietary guidelines for Americans have been released. And I thought it might be fun today to actually have a little bit of a chat about some of the headlines there. Love your reflections as a foodie on, what you think, is really strong and solid about the guidelines, and perhaps if there are things that you think maybe there's some missed opportunities there. So I think, why don't we just dive straight in, and then we get a bit of a commentary as we go through the key points. But anyone can go to the it's the real, and you can actually see these new guidelines. And there is quite a radical shift, to be honest, from previous guidelines. So much so that most of us have heard about this food pyramid before.
Mm-hmm.
They've literally flipped the pyramid on its head. So it's an inverted pyramid now. And that's the shape they've used to try and capture how we should be approaching our daily food choices. So anyway, there's sort of several key themes that have emerged, and in order that they're listed on the website. Let's start off and enjoy some reflections on them. So here's number one. First thing they recommend is that you eat the right amount of food for you.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
I love that, because we know that varies. It varies based on body weight. It varies based on level of activity and type of activity. And at some level, you and I have a lifestyle medicine colleague in New York who's an exercise scientist who is very, very clear, and he's doing a lot of work in the area of obesity in particular. Jeff Young is his name. And Jeff is very clear that at some level, we've got to confront the idea that that body weight is a function of calories in, calories out in some way.
Mm.
You just can't escape that. Yes, there's lots of ways we can slice and dice that. Yes, there are no doubt individualised and metabolic factors that play a role here. But at some point, if the amount of calories you consume exceeds the amount of calories that you expend, you gain weight. And if it's the opposite, you lose weight. And if they're equal, your weight doesn't change.
Just to add to that, I remember chatting with Dr. John Kelly one time, who's the founding president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and he made this really quite insightful nuance to that. He said, it's not just calories in, it's calories absorbed and calories expended. So, and obviously that brings into the whole, digestive processes, gut
Exactly
microbiome.
right.
So,
exactly
so it
right.
is.
Yeah.
But I think, to be honest,
At the bottom of all of that is the idea that you can't simply eat endless calories. You need to be attentive to who you are, to what you do, to how much of it you do.
Yeah.
And balance your food accordingly.
Yeah. And look, I don't think there's anyone out there disputing that. I think that this is a fairly mainstream accepted kind of, even ancient, the hara hachibu, like leave the table 80% full and portion control. All of these things, I think, speak to this idea that this is a good approach, and and we'll probably bring this theme up repetitively as we chat. But Michael Pollan's approach, where he says, "Hey, you know what? If you want to sum up all the nutrition research and literature, it pretty much boils down to we'll talk about what the two of them are, but the last one is eat real food, not too much. Moderating that." And it's a really interesting challenge though that's unique to our time, isn't it? And you can understand because historically we've just been obsessed with trying to get enough calories in, and that's been our challenge. Now we have this overabundance, and so moderating ourselves when our brains still say there's calories there, consume them.
Yeah,
you can understand why this is a challenge. So good advice.
Yeah, and there's too much there, and also the density per volume of food. With many of the processed foods that are freely available now, the density of calories that we get makes that a challenge as well.
It does.
But the principle of, and if you think about how to operationalise this principle, then it brings in elements of self-reflection, of mindfulness, of attention to your own body, which I think are all really valuable in a lifestyle medicine context. It makes us connect more with ourselves and think more about what am I experiencing right now? What does this feel like? I will say yes, I love food. And I love eating food, but I also really enjoy the experience of mild to moderate hunger. And I seek that experience most days, because then the food that I eat tastes really great, because I feel like I'm satisfying this kind of quite significant need that I have at the time, which you don't get if you never get to the point of experiencing hunger.
Yeah, that's good. So I like this. I actually think, the whole, leading with that idea of, hey, eat, the right amount of food for you. And what they also include under that theme is the importance of hydration and steering away from sweetened hydration products. So I think that's a good thing. Now we go to theme number 2. And so I'll be interested in your reflections on this. It states, prioritize protein foods at every meal. What's your gut response to that one?
So here's a really interesting thing. This is making me think about, and this is not just in relation to this particular document and pyramid, but who is the pyramid for and what purpose do we use it for? Because I don't consciously think about prioritizing protein foods at every meal. It's not something that I'm thinking when I prepare food. And I also know that I get plenty of protein in my diet just through the foods that I habitually eat. Obviously, as part of a broad and sustaining diet, we need protein. we need carbohydrates, we need fats. I guess I'm reminded of the words of David Katz, who often makes reference to the idea of instead of what. So when there's a recommendation made to eat more this or eat that, he often rejoins with instead of what. What are you replacing it with? And if I think about that here, prioritise protein foods at every meal, then the implication might be prioritise protein and then deprioritise the other two groups, which are fats and carbohydrates. What do I think about that? I guess if, ultra-processed foods, I think are probably characterised by fats and carbohydrates, highly refined carbohydrates. So if I contextualise all of this, if I read this in the context of the broader document, which is, first of all, eat real food. Secondly, eat the amount that's right for you. Thirdly, prioritise protein foods and therefore deprioritise refined carbohydrates and fats. I'm comfortable enough with that, and I'll say that there's a lot of kind of thinking pathways and dependencies there as well that are important to pay attention to. If you dig down into the detail of that a little bit, there's a reference to protein dense or nutrient dense foods, which I think is a good principle. Eating a smaller amount of food that has plenty of the nutrient that you need. There's a variety of foods. Animal sources come first: eggs, poultry, seafood, and red meat. And a variety of plant-sourced protein foods: beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy. I think it's great that plant foods are getting a call out there. I get little to no protein from animal foods. Every so often, I might get served something with an egg, and I'll eat it because I enjoy eggs. But I never have a dozen eggs sitting in the refrigerator, for example. For me and my diet, this wouldn't have any impact on changing what I consume.
It's interesting
because I think that I do that already.
Yeah, in response to your question, I mean, who is this for? And that's actually a good point of reflection. And I think obviously it's for the general public and consumers. But what this also does define is, for example, government school lunch programs. They will have to fall in accord with the recommendations here. To be honest, I feel a bit stronger about this particular theme than you do. It sounds like I think there's a missed opportunity here. And to be honest, I feel that I would love to have seen another word being prioritised over protein, and that is fibre. I think that when we look at in most countries, and including the US, it's over 90% of people are getting truly enough protein. Protein's not the problem.
Yeah. There's no protein crisis yet.
But conversely, over 90% of people aren't getting enough fibre. And as we know, fibre is only found in plant products. So I'm intrigued as to where this is coming from and why so much emphasis on protein. To be honest, as I've got older, I have intentionally tried to, and I'm plant-based, but tried to increase my protein intake just a little. I'm intrigued that historically we'd sort of recommend that people should be consuming about 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight of protein. That's been upped,
it's been increased here.
It's now they're recommending 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein. And what I thought was a lovely touch, though, is they used in the American guidelines, they use grams per kilogram. Go figure. That's a beautiful thing. And sorry to our American friends, we love pounds as well, sort of. But this was a whole lot more readable for me as I was going through this. But yeah, look, I think I'm intrigued that's this is the second key theme. The first one, eat the right amount of food for you. Second one, prioritise protein foods at every meal. I feel that's strong. I think that's very strong advice.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion there.
Yeah, and as I hear you say that, I'm reminded again of that in place of what principle, or you've called it the missed opportunity, which I think is really valuable to reflect on. What are we? If you choose one thing, you don't choose another.
That's right.
unless you choose something that does both. So, for example, if you're looking at sources of, if you're looking at protein and fibre, then you might look at, grains like quinoa, for example, which does a nice job of giving both.
Mm.
But yeah, look, I'm inclined to that perspective as well. That yeah, there's maybe a missed opportunity to emphasise something that really does need to be emphasised generally in Western diets. There are within that particular area, though. There's a couple of other headline points that I think are valuable. Swap deep fried cooking methods with baked, broiled, roasted, stir fried, or grilled cooking methods. So if you're going to cook something, avoid the deep frying and do it differently. I like the possibly not so keen on the if preferred flavour with salt, spices, and herbs. I definitely like the spices and herbs part. Again, salt, I think we need to think about in the context of what are the other sources of salt that a person might be getting in their diet. If they're already eating a lot of highly and ultra processed foods, it's likely that there's a high amount of sodium there to start with, and it probably is sodium, not potassium. So yeah. There's parts of that I that sort of sit quite well with me. Other parts that I think, yeah, maybe there's an opportunity to still name some other things that aren't yet appearing.
Yeah. Okay, point number 3 then is just simply states consume dairy. And the point under it is that when consuming dairy, include full fat dairy with no added sugars. Dairy is an excellent source of protein. Once again, I've been intrigued by how much protein, the word protein, features throughout the documentation, the recommendations. Dairy is an excellent source of protein, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals.
Yeah.
3
so here's the
as the goal.
Yeah, here's the thing. Here's the thing that I would find really challenging about that. I generally don't like dairy, and particularly don't like whole dairy milk. Ever since I was a kid, and for the listeners, I'm sorry for the graphic description, but it makes me gag, like quite literally. If I drink a mouthful of milk, I get this terrible gag reflex. So I don't do that. There was a time when I used to eat yogurt, but it's not something I enjoy. I certainly don't like cream. I enjoy a small amount of cheese, but some cheeses, not all cheeses. So I would struggle to meet that personally, because it's just not a part of what I like eating. 3 servings a day, I would I'm more likely, my dairy consumption is more likely 1 serving per week, if that. So yeah, I would struggle here.
I was a little surprised that it didn't include plant-based dairy alternatives. Because I know that I'm fairly certain that some other countries and even perhaps previous iterations of the guidelines have allowed for that. What I would say is that this one does surprise, certainly from, I would say, and I'm not a spokesperson for the lifestyle medicine community, but, you and I are very involved in it. I would say that this would be not well accepted within that community. I think that there are a lot of key studies which have shown, like even the key sort of the prominent advocates. I'm thinking of Colin Campbell's study, the China study, but others, the sort of the luminaries in lifestyle medicine. I think I can't think of one, to be honest, that would. I know that Dean Ornish in some of his would allow low fat dairy, portions of it. That was my understanding. But certainly, if you look at Colin Campbell and Paul Esselstyn, very much steering away from dairy, and certainly in the format of it. So this one intrigues me.
Yeah. there is, and this is always the challenge with any sort of publication or document like this. They're detailed. This particular one, I think, is about 10 pages, 9 pages. This headline document is, and you have to scroll down or scroll if you're looking at it electronically. Scroll or flip if you're reading the paper version, to find some more specific advice. And when you go further down, for example, there is a section that's directed at vegetarians and vegans. Now, I've got to say, I don't like that terminology.
LIFT is supported by the LIFT Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The LIFT Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
I don't because it doesn't really describe anything, but the specific advice is consume a variety of whole foods, especially protein-rich foods such as dairy, eggs, beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, tofu or tempeh. So clearly people who consider themselves to be vegans wouldn't be having the dairy and eggs there. I like this next bit. Significantly limit highly processed vegan or vegetarian foods. That could include added fats, sugars and salts. This reminds us that just because the word vegan or vegetarian appears somewhere doesn't make it healthy. Exactly right. But pay attention to nutrient gaps. So be mindful of nutrient gaps. Vitamin B12 is referenced there. I'm someone who chooses to take a vitamin B12 supplement just because of the diet I choose to follow. So I think that's a good reminder. There's a specific section for people managing chronic disease. I think going back to your missed opportunity comment earlier, we've got a lot of research in lifestyle medicine that shows the impact of a plant-forward diet in treating and reversing the impact of chronic disease and the effect of chronic disease. So for me, it's a little disappointing that very big body of research doesn't get more attention just there. Yeah. But one of the things, there's a specific naming of alcohol here. Consume less alcohol for better health, and the usual advice about people who should completely avoid alcohol, pregnant, lactating women, and so on. So there are certainly some things here that I feel kind of align with some of what we understand from the research in the field of lifestyle medicine.
Coming to point 4, theme 4 for me is where it starts to get a lot better alignment, and that is the theme 4 says eat vegetables and fruits throughout the day.
Yeah.
Now, the recommendations are a little lower than some parts of the world. So they're saying 3 serves of vegetables and 2 serves of fruit, which, as I said, is lower than some places. But I do like the emphasis here of eating a variety of colourful, nutrient-dense vegetables in their original forms. And I think the talk, and this occurs throughout the documentation, the emphasis on real foods, which once again aligns with Michael Pollan's mantra of eat food. He's saying real food, stuff that your great-great-grandma would have recognised as food. That's not in a box, that comes from a farm, not a factory, that kind of rhetoric. I think this is moving the right direction here. So
yeah.
I do like
I've just done a quick search in the document because I've got an electronic version in front of me. And this is a 9-page document, including the image on the front of the inverted pyramid. So there's 8 pages of text, and the phrase "real food" appears 8 times in the document. Yeah. That phrase "real food" is appearing on average once every page.
Yes.
So that's a solid reminder of the broad type of food that we're talking about here.
Yeah. So I think it takes a bit of a highlight, a bit of an upswing in my mind on theme 4 there, that eating vegetables and fruits. And certainly, I'm just thinking about my experience with lifestyle medicine and what I've seen over the decades now. It seems to me that once again, the most substantive body of evidence just showing that, if you're interested in prevention and treatment, even of chronic conditions, most of the big studies that have demonstrated that, well, I think, to be honest, probably all of them have actually really been predicated on that plant-based approach, that buy a lot of vegetables, fruits, and the like. So I like that one. Theme 5 is incorporate healthy fats. Once again, we see this, so that just the byline here, the explanation is healthy fats are plentiful in many whole foods. So it's talking about that whole foods, real foods, once again, such as meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich seafoods, and then it does include nuts, seeds, full-fat dairy, which is obviously where that emphasis on full-fat, not low-fat dairy is coming from, olives and avocados.
Sadly, my two favourites are right at the end of the list.
At the end of the list, yeah.
Yeah, olives and avocados.
Olives, you can have all of mine, brother. All of mine. I actually despise those things. I love olive oil. It's the bizarrest thing. I enjoy it. Olives. Oh, my wife loves them.
Do you know that more than 50% of the world's olive oil comes from Spain?
Really? Well, there you go. You can't not love it there, surely.
And about 20% of the world's table olives also come from Spain.
Oh, there you go. I remember with every one of our children, when they got to the age that they could eat solid foods, and my wife put an olive in their mouth for the first time, I was sitting there going, spit it out, spit it out, spit it out. And every one of them, their eyes lit up and they chewed and then wanted another. And I'm just going, oh. So I'm the only one in my family, but olives not so much for me. But nonetheless, this whole idea of incorporating healthy fats and sort of, and it does say less than saturated fat, less than 10% of total calories. What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah. So this is where let me use a metaphor. If we have activity guidelines that say, be active for a certain amount of time every day, and do a variety of different exercises, a variety of different body movements, if you like, rather than, I don't want to invoke the idea of exercise necessarily, but just a variety of different body movements, and very, very specifically incorporate a variety of different step styles in the way that you move. That's a really difficult thing to operationalize, because it gets you focused on something that is really hard to actually focus on. The different angles that I might place my foot, and whether I go toe first or heel first, and so on. But here's the thing: if you're following the first ones, you're probably automatically following that one anyway. So if you're doing plenty of activity and movement through the day, if there's already a variety to it, you're probably also incorporating a variety of step styles there. And part of me feels the same way about this, that if you're already having that diet, for example, that has olives and avocados and nuts and seeds and so on, you're probably already consuming those fats that are not just beneficial for health, but essential for health as well. So I don't know. I think
that reiterating this theme would certainly, in my mind, not be necessary in light of what's been advocated earlier. I think that if people are starting to eat protein and prioritize protein, as it says, with every meal, by and large, the most and when we're talking about animal products, they're going to be getting plenty of fats. I don't think it's something you need to be additionally mindful of. And that said too, from a lifestyle medicine perspective, I'm mindful of that. Some of the most potent studies, the likes of Corwell Esselstyn and the work he did, with reversing heart disease. He was working on very low fat diets. In fact, he was trying to. I think in his studies, participants were consuming less than 10% total fat. Not just saturated fat. Like I think the average
but all fats.
And so he would even, there were even certain. It's my understanding that even some certain plant foods he would sort of discourage because they were
because they were high in fat.
So I'm not sure about that one, but the next theme, we're getting close to the end.
Just before we go off that one, the other part of this that does puzzle me a little bit, and again, I'm not sure how I operationalise this in my diet. I'm trying to do some quick maths while we speak right now. The very last part of that mentions saturated fat consumption should not exceed 10% of total daily calories. So you don't want more than 10% of your calories coming from saturated fat. That's how you read that?
Yes, that's correct. And of course, fat is very energy dense, so that means
exactly right. So let me just have a look here. I'm looking. So now I'm trying to think about putting all of this together, like everything in this document. And if you go back to the image at the top, which is the inverted pyramid that we talked about, across the top there's a piece of steak. There's a whole roast chicken. Now I'm looking at what this visually looks like. There's also, can you see this? There's a carton of whole milk, and behind that looks to be. Does that look like a tray of minced meat to you? Minced beef?
Yes.
So I'm thinking about the Australian supermarkets that I'm familiar with. I think a tray like that is about 500 grams of minced beef. If you look at that steak, so just look at the size of it. Now there's a roast chicken to the right. Imagine turning that steak on its side, and so it's vertical. I reckon you'd fit about 4 of those steaks across the roast chicken. Now that roast chicken weighs about 1.8 kilos, would be my guess. I mean, that's a roughly a roast chicken size, 1.8 kilos, which means the steak is about 450 grams, roughly equivalent to the 500 grams of minced meat. So just that one steak, I think, given an average amount of sat fat and for a 450 gram steak, I think just that one steak is going to take you over the 10% of daily saturated fat calories. And that's before you do any eggs, avocados, nuts, seeds, whole milk, yogurt, etc. So this question really is about, it kind of comes back to that idea of amount. What are we cueing to people in this image about the amount to eat? There's a whole head of broccoli too, which I love. My wife and I, most days of the week, literally eat a whole head of broccoli between us, as well as a bunch of other things, like buying a whole head of broccoli and cutting that up and eating it. I mean, that's just it's my favourite vegetable, broccoli. There's a bunch of carrots there. There's a whole lettuce. I can live without a lettuce. There's 1.5 apples. There's a potato. There's 1.25, 1.2 oranges, maybe 1.15 oranges there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 bananas, half an avo. Yeah. So my question is, what does this subconsciously cue in people, and how easy is it going to be to put all of this together in a way that kind of satisfies all of those specific requirements? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something that's on my mind as a perhaps a challenge here.
I think that's right, and obviously a picture tells 1,000 words. So that visual representation and sort of highlighting these certain items is what people naturally believe that are being endorsed. So incorporating health fats, I'm with you. I think that one, from a lifestyle medicine perspective, I think that high fat isn't the way to go. That's my personal conviction. But even if you think it is, I think it's a redundant point given the previous recommendations of having protein with every meal. All right, moving along quickly towards the end. Next one, focus on whole grains. I was encouraged by that, to be honest. I think that whole grains get bad rap nowadays, and certainly and the recommendations do talk about sort of limiting refined grains, and I think that's refined grains, and anything
absolutely
that's processed is going to become problematic. So I quite like that one. And then playing on from that, the next recommendation is to limit highly processed foods, added sugars, refined carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anyone that's disagreeing with that.
No argument. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Even I'm pleased to see fruit drinks have been named in there as well, because they're the ones that lurk in the background, seemingly,
Yes.
wearing
Yeah.
a cloak of health
Yeah.
because it's because it's apple or orange or something else.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, yeah. So yeah, look, I agree. I agree. It's nice to see those called out.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I was encouraged by that. I think that was a positive. And then the last one, and maybe this is contentious in various circles, but the idea of limiting alcoholic beverages. I think that word probably caters for most perspectives. I don't think there's anyone out there advocating that huge volumes of alcohol, are advantageous. I mean, I'm personally not a teetotaler, but I think that the byline here is consume less alcohol for better overall health.
Yeah,
and then they identify certain subgroup sets, for example, pregnant women who, ideally should completely abstain. So, yes,
no argument.
I don't think there's any argument there. So, but what we can say, so, probably when I look over it, I do think I have some challenges. I personally think there's some missed opportunities. And I'm interested that certain things seem to be quite heavily emphasised that I'm not sure that they are certain. I don't think, in my opinion, that they probably needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But what about you? What would you say your overall summation of the new guidelines are?
Yeah, look, probably similar. I mean, there are things that I definitely feel are pointing in the right direction. And, the important disclosure here is that I'm a lifestyle medicine professional with a good basic and more than the average person understanding of nutrition. But I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist, and I haven't studied nutrition to the extent that many practitioners in lifestyle medicine have. And they would obviously have some more clearly articulated views than us. But that's it. There are certainly some things that speak to me, and I feel like are consistent with what I've grown to understand as the evidence base for nutrition. There are some. You've used the word missed opportunities. I agree with that as well. Can I say I'm sad to see one of my favourite foods. In fact, two of my favourite foods. Two of my favourite foods are red lentils in particular. I like all lentils, red lentils, brown and green lentils, puy lentils, P-U-Y, it's sometimes also called French lentils, beluga lentils, sometimes called caviar lentils. I love all of those, but I do particularly love red lentils. And I do particularly love black beans. I love all beans. I love black beans, kidney beans, alluia, white beans. I can't think what they're called in English now, but here they're called judiones, big beans, judiones and judias. And I'm sad that there doesn't appear to be many beans in this picture. Yeah. I would love to see more beans, and I would love to see lentils. And I would love to see a cauliflower there as well, because I love cauliflower. And there's also no capsicum. I'm a bit sad about that because I really like capsicum. And I can't see garlic and I can't see onion. And that makes me sad too. Many of my favourite foods aren't here. So I'm a bit sad about that. But yeah. Look, I think one of the headline sort of framings of this is that, and I think this is on the USDA website in bold letters. America is sick, and I think if you pause to reflect on the meaning behind that, this is significant. That the dietary pattern over many decades has led to a devastating disease impact for many people. A reduction in quality of life, a reduction in lifespan, and a reduction in years of healthy living, and so on. So taking some action to address that is, I think, important and to be applauded. My views on on change. I'm a small step person, so the idea of
the pyramid.
making making incremental steps, I think is valuable. Yeah. That's probably where
That's your musings. Well, if you would like to check out the new dietary recommendations for yourself, just go to the government website. And one person in this space that I have huge admiration for is Dr. David Katz.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I know that he has written prolifically around these dietary guidelines. And so if you'd like to sort of, hear a different perspective on them and perhaps some of the other missed opportunities, then he might be a great person to check out his work. I know he's posted a lot on LinkedIn and some other platforms as well, including the Huffington Post. Yeah, we'd love to hear. What do you think of the new guidelines? Yeah.
And a more educated perspective than ours as well.
For sure. That's exactly right. But we'd love to hear from you. If you let us know, what are your thoughts on the new 2025 or 2026 to 2030 US dietary guidelines?
Yeah. And if you also love red lentils and black beans, send us a message. And olives.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.